Join us.
They used to call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.
What up? Welcome back to the Necro Zoo. I am Bones. And in this one, let's go ahead and add one more mega figure to my McFarlane DC Multiverse collection. Now this time we are taking a look at the mega figure Bane. Now tons of people have been waiting for this figure. If you know my channel, you know me. I am a big Batman fan, but I am an even bigger Bane fan. In fact, I would have to say the best part of this was having to pick what shirt I was going to wear for the review. And I have to say I probably have more Bane shirts than I actually have Batman shirts. And that is no lie. Now we have gotten a couple of reviews on this guy, but of course I will have my own take on him. But he does look very punishing in the packaging. But let's go ahead and take a closer look at him. But first, he does come with your standard black DC Multiverse stand. Not really needed, but sometimes they come in useful. He also comes with his data file card. On the front, you do have some source material. Artwork, actually pretty cool looking artwork. Bane having a rather gray tone of skin and pumping a lot of venom through his veins. Looks pretty cool. And on the back, you do have some information. Go ahead and add that to the collection. Now, before we get into it, a little bit about Bane. One reason I've always liked Bane is because in his original form, he not only matches and surpasses Batman in physical ability and strength, but he is also really, really intelligent, which is something I've always lived my life by, is to be not only physically strong, but also mentally sharp in any situation. And that actually has helped me throughout my life. But pretty big Bane fan, you cannot deny it. Always been my top DC villain, if not villain in general. Just the way I see him, not only in his original upbringing in the prison, but also the way he built his strength and studied his opponent before he swooped in and laid the fatal blows on him, and of course breaking the bat. Awesome Behind the Nightfall storyline. Really cool stuff if you ever read it. Of course, that's what I grew up on. So nonetheless, you know, this is something I really love. An actual McFarlane Bane megafig. I could care two craps about if he has double fist, if he has limited articulation, if he's not comic accurate. I just don't really care. All I care about is it's an official McFarlane release, and he is now in my collection. But let's go ahead and take a closer look at him. Pretty hefty boy. He's not the biggest, but he is lean and mean. Pretty bulky. First impressions. Although I do love the musculature, I wouldn't say I'm a big fan of the aesthetics of this figure. I mean, he is a big burly guy, and that's what he's supposed to be. And in all actuality, this is more of like a monster Bane that came out later on in the comics, because originally he was just a pretty like peak of human level, you know, performance and musculature, but with the added dose of venom just made him a little bit stronger and unstoppable. But this is a more like monstrous version that has come out after the Bane mythos has grown. But all in all, like I said before, I could care less. This is a awesome looking Bane. He looks really good in hand. Feels good. The materials they have used are really nice to the touch, so I'm really happy with it. You could see all his. You could see in this version, it's like kind of a militaristic harness on him. He still has the quintessential Bane features like the Gauntlet unit and the hoses, the tank, his fingerless gloves. I mean, everything that's Bane is here. It's just a unique take on him, which we know McFarlane is prone to do. Let's take a look at the head. Now, this is a more like realistic take, which I would say is the whole figure is a more realistic take on Bane. You could actually see the grain in the mask. He has that like lucha libre split down the middle of his mask. You know, that's the stitching, the stitch line. And then you could see the stitch work around the white form that shapes his face, kind of giving him kind of a skull look, but not completely. I'd say now in these times, this is a Bane look, not necessarily a skull look, but a Bane, shape. But looks really good. You could see the textures and even wrinkles in there. You could slightly see the shape of his ears, like on the sides of the head. So all in all, a beautiful Bane head sculpt. Now let's take a look at the articulation. He could look down pretty good. Not too far, but enough. Can't look up really at all. But of course, this is probably just going to be a thing to do with the peg and the peg porthole. So of course, I'm going to modify him and see if we could get more range out of him. He has no problem looking to the right or to the left. And you can cock his head for some attitude. A little tight, you could even hear it in the rubber. But we'll go ahead and modify that later on. Let's take a look at the chest harness. Like I said before, kind of militaristic look, and also it makes sense because this is what's holding the tank onto his back. And of course, this takes parts from a lot of iterations of Bane. I mean, there's tons of versions of Bane where you could pick and choose. I mean, you have masks that, like an old school Lucha Libre mask, which was more like the original animated series Bane. And then you go into like Tom Hardy that has the mouth covered. And then the Arkham games where he's just like a crazy beast. Tons and tons of versions. That's pretty much unlimited of where Bane has been taken. But I love the original calculating, powerful, backbreaking villain. That's the one I love. But you could see his pouches on here and his buckles, pretty nicely sculpted. You could add some detail of silver to a lot of the parts, which we will probably do. And then underneath this, which is really well connected to the body, you do have his muscle shirt underneath. In case someone would like to try and remove this harness, but you'd have probably some patch-up work to do. But I, for one, am probably going to wait and see what other versions maybe McFarlane will put out. If none ever come about, then maybe later I'll decide to custom another one of these Banes into a more Nightfall version. Traditionally, all in all, pretty cool chest. Let's take a look at the waist. Now this is something I've been really interested to take a look at. He does have side to side. It is a little bit restricted because of the belt, but it is rubber. Now he does have the full range of motion at the waist. He does have a lower waist swivel, but not an upper chest swivel. There's nothing there. You could still twist him, put him in some cool poses. Not really any forward crunch to speak of, but I'll tell you this. If you wanted him to lean over and you just used the whole portion of the pelvis and everything, then he can actually lean over. So you could get him like in a menacing look, like leaning over somebody, but it not necessarily does it come from the abdominals or the cuts here. It actually comes from the whole pelvic region. You could still find range in there if you want to. Now he can lean back really far, which is pretty sweet. All in all, not the best, but it's not the worst articulation, and you could probably get him to do a lot of things that people will be surprised that he can do. Let's take a look at the shoulder. No butterfly joint in here at all, but you do have pretty free swiveling shoulders, but there's just no movement in there at all, like the traditional McFarlane butterfly bushing and all that. No bicep swivel, but that's kind of fine, because whenever they do not have a bicep swivel, but they do have this elbow swivel, it kind of really makes up for it, and sometimes even gives it even more range than usual. So I do not mind that, because he has the elbow swivel and it doesn't cut up at the bicep, so it's fine, not a big deal. Moving down into his Gauntlet controller for the Venom, pretty nice, well sculpted. Love the green that they use on these hoses to represent the Venom, really neon green. Now the hands are sculpted nicely with the fingerless gloves. You could even see the fingernails in there, but one thing is that it's not the traditional McFarlane wrist ball joint. It's kind of just the regular pivot style, so you could only actually get him to go up and down at the wrist. You will not get the extra articulation, but that's not too bad because he's a bigger character, so but you could still get a lot of cool range out of him. Now of course these are single jointed elbows. Could get a 90 out of it though. Let's take a look at the other arm. Man, the sculpt work on this side looks awesome. You could see all the the tendons and the muscle sinews, and look at those tries. Man, this guy's ripped. Looks really good, especially because he doesn't have that gauntlet, so you could see all his forearm like it's all ripped. So that's really cool. Let's take a look if he could do a T-pose. Yep, he could get the T-pose. Now you can't get higher than this, but you could probably rotate his arms and get his hands above his head for like lifting purposes, preparing to break vertebrae with my knee. So that's always nice. All in all, not too bad. Like I said before, it's not going to be the best articulation because he is a big figure. Now going down, now this belt is pretty nice. In the traditional Nightfall, he doesn't have this red bead, but this is another thing that has just become tradition for Bane, is for him to have that red dot on his belt. Pretty cool. Now let's take a look at his thigh swivel. Man, there's a lot of range there. Look at that. You could almost get it to turn all the way around. So you need no thigh cuts here because you have all that range. Now this allows him to kick up really high, giving that mafia kick style kick. And then you could kick back really high behind him. And that is because of the rubber in the trunks. And then when you put it back, it just goes back to its original form. Now you can cock his leg out. He does have double jointed knees. He has that hip swivel. Really nice. Crunching down the double jointed knees all the way. The knee does not look bad at all. It has a smooth flow. Pop it back out. At the ankle you have up and down. Not really side, like right to left, but you do have rocker. But I think what will adjust this is if you want to move the boot, you could just move the thigh swivel, and that's how the boot can actually move. Which is actually how a real human moves his legs, like that. He doesn't move it with a thigh cut or with a boot cut. A human turns his actual foot by turning up here at the hip. So that is actually accurate. Pretty interesting. Now before we go, let's take a look at the whole lower body. Man, I'm going to tell you something. When I first saw this, I thought that the knee pads were actually pieces of cloth. That they decided to do a new thing where they would just glue a piece of cloth on the knees. But actually no, it is sculpted plastic, and the whole legs and pouches and have that cloth texture. really is very exceptional sculpt work. I mean, just the detail and the feel, the texture, going down to the boots. You even have sculpting in the connector here to the ankle to the boot. Man, it's crazy. These are some really nicely sculpted boots. Awesome. I mean, the whole thing is just, it looks so realistic. That's what I would say, is it kind of looks like material. But when you touch it, you can see that it's just plastic and rubber, but they're getting really good at their sculpting of texture. So let's take a look at them from the bottom. This is kind of sad. I mean, no tread, just like the outer ridge has some, like kind of like spikiness to it, but there is some identifying marks, but there is no tread. So that is a real bummer for me. Now moving up the back, more nice sculpt work, even on the boots, the pants. Got the back pouches there, the belt. Now you could get a real close look at the tank back here mounted onto his back. Now, the tank is another thing that came out later on in different versions of Bane. It wasn't in the original Nightfall version, but it is something that has become synonymous with Bane. Now the tank actually goes into the very top of his head, and then the two venom tubes go like to the side. So really nicely sculpted. These are pretty soft. You want to be careful with them. But you could even add some detail paint onto this, like maybe like some brass, some like brass paint wash to give it some life. But we'll do all that to this Bane. Don't worry about it. All in all, really awesome Bane figure to add to the collection. I'm not disappointed with it at all. Now, of course, you have people saying that, oh, it should have had two fists, but I'll tell you something, a lot of other versions of Bane only came with one set of hands. It was either fists or it was either grasping hands, and that was it. So it's not like a big surprise that you only get one pair of hands, especially from McFarlane. But this is what's been officially released, and I'm happy with it. Not sad at all that I pretty much paid $35 for this guy. Now, let's go ahead and show the head mod. Now, what I did do is pop off the head. And one thing I did notice when I did that is that this head is actually a lot more rubber than other heads. I mean, it still has stiffness to it, but when you heat it up, it became really soft. Like they're just messing with the blends of plastic that they use, and this one was really soft. So then I did pop out the peg and bore a hole in the back of the porthole. Now this allows for the peg to slide back even further, and when you pop the head back on, it should give us a little bit more range. Now surprisingly, when he looks down now, he looks really down, like into his chest even, which is awesome. But then also he could look up really high now, which is a lot better. More options if you're gonna take pictures with this guy, and he looks up almost completely up, which is a simple thing you could do that adds to the articulation. And actually, I'm gonna end up buying 3 of these. I already know that. So this one is going to be the one I'm going to custom paint, and then I'll have another one to open, and then one to keep in the archives of my collection in box. But all in all, really happy with this guy. Now with the articulation this guy does have, I'll tell you something, he can get in some really cool squatted down poses. That's something people think like, oh, McFarlane just makes statues. But if you really wanted to, this guy could really articulate. So, of course, I have to do it. Let's go ahead and see him in a couple of shots breaking the bat. I actually chose for the more over the knee and hunched down, like pushing down version. But he could do it. He could probably do the other lifting him up and hitting with the knee. But I prefer this, like putting pressure until his spine crackles. That's really what puts a smile to my face. But he could do it all. Really limber guy for the lower body. Especially if you want him breaking the bat. And he stands really well. Let's put him up next to some figures. let's start off small and go with my custom Batman 1000 with the oval, just so you could see some size comparisons between a Batman from McFarlane and him. Then let's go to a larger figure, which will be Lobo, also custom painted by me. But he's a bigger boy, so, you know, getting up there in size. Then let's put him next to Man-Bat, another custom that I did with those glowing red eyes. He's still a little bit taller than Man-Bat, so that tells you how tall this guy is. Now let's get into the Banes. First, let's put him up against my custom Arkham Bane that I got in parts, and I just modified some legs to fit on him with boots and painted him like more of a Nightfall mask on him. One of the first customs I actually really did, and it's still pretty cool. He's a big bulky boy, that's for sure. Then let's put him up next to the actual Nightfall DC Direct Bane, which has like 5 points of articulation. So good luck trying to get him into like crouch down positions, because it's just not going to happen. But he is a really sought after Bane figure. Then let's put him up next to my DC Universe Classics Collect to Build Bane. I mean, this is the has more things that are more reminiscent of what Bane is actually supposed to look like, but he only came with 2 fists, so of course I'm going to give points off of it. How could you not have 2 interchangeable hands? He only has 2 fists, and how is he supposed to lift up Batman and break his back with 2 fists and not grabbing hands? They really dropped the ball with DC Universe Classics on that one. Sarcasm. And finally, to get with McFarlane, let's put him against the Last Night on Earth Bane, which I actually love. Now this is my custom repainted one with also a custom scarecrow on his back. Creep version, I mean, just the creep essence of it and the obscurity of it was always cool to me. I love the way he has that bat on his mask. It's just a certain type of Bane. Like I said before, there's hundreds of versions of Bane. But he's a pretty massive dude. And I also have a regular, you know, when he was in the zombie skin. And he looks really big next to this Bane, even though this Bane is taller. But those, I think, actually weigh a little bit more. But all in all, guys, really happy to add this guy to the collection. If you could scoop him up, I would suggest you go ahead and do it. But you guys keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.